that people are educated and developed to enable them to participate in a developmental state. So the state that is a developmental state must consciously want to change the productive structure for greater economic development. It must not just be a state or councillors or ministers or members of the executive council that wake up and get into blue lights and so on, and they're not sure exactly what it is that they want to do. We must remember that the state must want to change the productive structure for greater economic development. We must want to change the productive structure for the development of the people, the population in the state. And so the essence of the state, the reason for the existence of the state must be to overcome underdevelopment. The state must be guided and it must obey logic, rationality, and it must be dictated to by the material conditions. Logic and rationality. We should not come with ideas that cannot be defended when people question. Everything that we do must be rational, it must be logical, and it must be informed by what is happening in society at a particular point in time. It must consciously intervene for the sake of economic development, for the sake of developing the population. And it cannot be used by a faction or a power bloc that is interested only in. Unfortunately, our revolutionary movement is now being divided into factions, and it depends on which faction is in power that determines what the state are. And usually those interests are the interests of a faction. We should not degenerate into that kind of politics. We must ensure that at all times what guides us is decisions that are rational, that are logical, that are in the interests of development of the people. So, the political orientation of a developmental state is development. The reason why the state exists, the reason why you get into government must be one and only one, and that is the development of the population, the development of the people. Education must be shaped for nation building. Education must not be irrelevant to the needs of the people. A lot of you stay here in Pietermaritzburg. You know Devon very well. There is a very big port in Devon Container Terminal. Our education here in Pietermaritzburg or in KZN does not speak to the needs of the skills requirement for the port. How many of you are being trained to become tug masters or captains of a vessel, or being trained for operations, to become managers of operations of a port, and yet you don't live so far away from an asset of the state that is very critical for economic development. So education must speak to the needs of the economy. It must speak to the needs of the population to be integrated into the formal economy and to play a meaningful role in the development of the economy. Our objective as a developmental state must be to take our country from the periphery of the world economy. Right now, we are on the edges of the world economy because of the size of the economy, because of the economic activity, because of the high unemployment, because of inequality. People don't feel, the ordinary citizens don't feel like they are the players in a global economy. So we need to have a state that is focused on taking people out of the periphery of the world economy. The developmental state must be a coalition of developmental classes. By developmental classes, I mean the entrepreneurial class, the workers, bureaucrats that are working in government. The entrepreneurial class, some of them are meeting next door here. The management, the business forum. We have to go into an alliance with people like entrepreneurs in the business forum, workers, bureaucrats, and of course the youth, students, women must be in an alliance to promote and advance this developmental state. Now, where have these developmental states existed in the world? Have we ever seen something like what I'm talking about now anywhere else in the world? The developmental states were evident, they were prevalent in the early developmental stages of the industrialized economies. Britain, US, France, Germany started off as developmental states. They built the big economies that they are today because their governments operated like developmental states. The government existed for the support of the population in developing, and they succeeded. And it is something that has been done before. It is something that we need to look into very closely in Africa. In Latin America, the countries have adopted, in Latin America have adopted the developmental state model. Brazil, Paraguay, Venezuela, they all talk about being developmental states. They all talk about existing to advance the needs of the people. The fastest growing economy in the world at the moment is in South America, right next to Venezuela, called British Columbia, I think. It considers itself to be a developmental state. China has adopted the developmental state model as well. And China has been the fastest growing economy in the world over a period of over 40 years, 40 to 50 years. It has had positive growth. For 30 years, it had double-digit growth of about 10%. It has taken more people out of poverty than has ever been done before in the history of humankind. And China is a force at the moment. It has grown to be the second biggest economy in the world after the United States because of the developmental state that were implemented over the last 40 years. They have what they call a National Development Reform Commission. And this National Development Reform Commission makes sure that the state follows the principles of a developmental state, not only in word or in speeches, but they also ensure that policies and the programs of the government are in such a way that they are about the developmental state. Of course, it also helps that China's underlying social philosophy is something called Confucianism. Confucianism, which is about ethics, morality, humaneness, and benevolence. In fact, if one looks at Confucianism, one will striking similarities between Confucianism in China and Ubuntu in Africa. Japan is also a developmental state. They have what they call the MITI, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, which looks at supporting industries that want to export goods, cars, especially electronics, and so on, and make sure that people are employed, that it puts the interests of the Japanese people ahead of anything else when it comes to employment and making sure that Japan has a role to play in the world economy. Korea is also a developmental state. So, what has been our experience in Africa? In the 1980s and the 1990s, the institutions, the Washington institutions, the Washington Consensus, the World Bank, the IMF, and so on, gave loans to a lot of African countries. And these loans came with conditionalities. And these conditionalities were strikingly anti-developmental state. They were not in line with what Japan and Britain and China and Germany did to develop their economy. They advocated for privatization, the privatization of railways, the privatization of electricity, utilities, and so on. And the borrowing of money in foreign currency from the World Bank and the IMF, which usually came with conditions, and what they call structural adjustment programs. One looks back at Africa's economic history, especially in the 80s and the 90s, one will see a concerted by external forces, external to Africa, to make sure that Africa does not adopt developmental state model. And those that tried had visited on them dire consequences. People like Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi in Libya was a developmental state. Education is free, university is free. When you get married, the government gives you money. Electricity is free in Libya. The Libyan government makes money and distributes it amongst the population. The Libyan population was probably one of the most advanced on the continent. What did that result in? Regime change. Gaddafi was attacked and killed, and up to today, nobody knows why Gaddafi was killed. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein may have been a dictator, but his state was a developmental state based on Islam. It was a caring state, and it was doing very well. They concocted the story to say that it's got weapons of mass destruction. They sentenced him to death, and they killed him. And today, Iraq is in a mess as a result of that. The population was better off under Hussein than it is now. The population of Libya was better off under Gaddafi than it is now. And those are not the only two examples. Kwame Nkrumah was murdered, and there was a coup, he was removed from power, there was a regime change. Kwame Nkrumah had been advocating a developmental state model. In the Congo, part of the Congo's problems was that the liberator of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba, was assassinated and killed. In South Africa, they don't necessarily kill us. But the moment you make certain noises, there is a way of marginalizing you. There is a way of marginalizing you. That is why President Zuma was convicted without a trial. It was a concerted effort because the ideas of a developmental state, of improving the quality of life of black people were uppermost in his time of government. And I am a witness. I was there. I was in the government as a senior civil servant, and I saw those policies that were aimed at improving the lives of black people, and I saw the consequences of trying to do so from certain quarters. You would be interested to know that despite 1 billion rand having been spent on the State Capture Commission, and that after 7 years, we have not been convicted of any crime. On the Wednesday that we were sworn into Parliament, the Friday following that Wednesday, President Ramaphosa signed executive orders to order the SIU to investigate us further, despite the fact that the investigations have been going on for the last 7 years. So, in the 80s and the 90s, there was this investment in energy. There was this investment in aviation. There was this investment in manufacturing. There was this investment in education. And that has been the experience of African countries. With trying to implement a developmental state model to make sure that the continent develops. In around 2008, 9, maybe 10, the Public Investments Corporation established what is still called the Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund, which was about mobilizing 1 billion from African resources to invest in infrastructure on the continent. That idea is still there, but the Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund is very different now. It is a fund that now is about private interests and enrichment of the people that are managing it. So, in South Africa, state-owned entities are instruments for a developmental state. They are important for a state that wants to develop its people. The idea of achieving development is taken forward by the existence of state-owned entities. After all, it was the state-owned entities that supported the rise of Afrikaner capital from the 1920s to the late 1980s. You remember that ISCO was a state-owned entity. Now, we produce a lot of iron ore from the Northern Cape, iron ore and manganese. We have the longest train running in South Africa, which is the Saldanha Session train, which is about 3 kilometers long. That is exporting raw iron ore without being beneficiated. But ISCO was the company that was set up by the government of the Afrikaners to beneficiate the steel. It was the Iron Steel Corporation of South Africa. When it became apparent that the apartheid government has to negotiate and has to talk about releasing political prisoners and banning the banned organizations, was sold and privatized. And now I think it is Mittelstein in South Africa. Sasol used to belong to the state, where the state refined its own petroleum products and produced its own petrol. But it was also sold in the 70s and 80s. And that was a big blow because Sasol company that provided us with cheap liquid petroleum and diesel and so on. We did not stop the privatization process after 1994. It continued. In fact, in 1994, there was a Ministry of Privatization that was established under Minister Jeff Hatton. Later on, the name was changed to Public Enterprises. And they privatized, you know, the airports company of South Africa was privatized. I was in the National Treasury at the time. The airports company was privatized. And however, in 2010, when we won the World Cup bid, it was bought by the Italians, Aeroporti di Roma, from Rome. And they became our partners, the shareholders in AXA. But when we won the World Cup bid, and we said to Aeroporti di Roma, we have to improve the quality of our airports. The Durban International Airport, which was there in the south, next to Amanzimtoni, next to Mlazi. We need to build another airport at Kinshasa, which is modern, which is world class. We need to upgrade Cape Town, we need to upgrade Joburg International. They refused. They said, guys, we are not here to improve the infrastructure. We invested because we want profit. And the fact that you won the World Cup is your problem. We had to go to Rome. 2010, President Zuma was president. And I was in that team, I led that team that went to renegotiate to buy those shares back from Aeroporti di Roma. And we did, we bought it with money from the PIC. And then after that, before the beginning of the World Cup, we were able to upgrade these airports because it was a political decision that says that we must use the World Cup as an opportunity to upgrade our infrastructure, create jobs, and present a world-class airports to the world that is coming to see where we did in South Africa during the World Cup. And unfortunately now there are rises about selling AXA again. I mean, I have been to go and rebuy state shares of the state from a privatized AXA. I don't know if many of you are old enough to remember that SAA was sold to Swiss Air in the late 2008, 2009. Swiss Air subsequently collapsed. We were sent again to go and buy those shares of SAA to keep it in state hands. To buy those shares of SAA to keep it in state hands. And now, Minister Pravin was in the process of selling it again for 51 rand. 51 rand. Why? There is nothing. The moment of pride that I felt. There's nothing like the moment of pride that I felt when we as South Africa took a political decision and dispatched an SAA flight that is captained by SAA pilots with a crew from the South African National Defence Force and Air Force, leaving OR to go and fetch South Africans in China during COVID. And they went and fetched those South Africans that were distressed there, because in China they were not a priority. They were foreigners. And they picked up other South Africans elsewhere on the way and brought them home. And the aircraft came and landed in Polokwane. And they were quarantined in a small hotel called the Ranch in Polokwane. Until they were safe to be rejoined with their families. That is the role of a development state. That is why we must own it, so that we can make decisions like that and say that I go Mebana, they are our children. And so if you sell it for 50, the owner, the 51 ranch owner, is going to say to you, when you say you must go and fetch people from China, not in that business of fetching and 40, what's going to say, aeroplane. ESCOM separation into distribution and generation and distribution, generation and transmission. The thing that they are doing now with the view of selling it was tried before. In the late 90s, it was called the Reds, and it was a failure, where they tried to establish a lot of small distribution companies out of ESCOM distribution. But that failed and did not go anywhere, that project. And ESCOM has performed very well as a single state-owned entity. I can say this because when we first had problems of load shedding, we were able to resolve the problem of load shedding because ESCOM was state-owned. That we took orders directly from the president. And that we advised at the highest level, what is it that we must do to stop load shedding? And we stopped load shedding until it was brought back in 2018. Until it was brought back by the rate an incompetent, I can't even call him a chief executive because I don't think he qualifies. And so, going forward, as a South African state that desires to develop our people, it is going to be important that we retain ESCOM and state hands, that we retain Transnet and state hands. These things that are being done, where the port of Durban is now being sold to the, is it Malaysians or Malaysians? Yeah, it's just completely out of order. We must find a way of making sure that our people can be trained for jobs that they can do at the airport, at the port. We must ensure that the Public Investments Corporation, which is the largest asset manager in Africa, is retained in state hands and is not sold. And that the mandate of the PIC continues to be the transformation of the South African people. Many years ago, there was a guy called Sidney Dam. Sidney Dam wrote the preface to a novel called Tale of Two Cities that had been written by Charles Dickens. You know that novel, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And Charles Dickens had been talking about the French Revolution and what happened after the French Revolution. And that when the revolution happened and people were excited that the ordinary people have been able to overthrow a king and a queen who were dictators and rose to the palace and took over the government. And there was a big moment of celebration. But the Tale of Two Cities was about, so what happened after the revolution? What happened after the revolution? The revolutionaries went and looked for the people that had been oppressing the masses. They set up the guillotine and they started chopping off their heads. And they did what Sidney Dark calls what the revolutionaries must do after a revolution. The revolutionaries must be if you fight for a revolution, you must be prepared to do the things that are necessary to defend that revolution after. And Sidney Dark warns that a revolution is a nasty business. It's not nice. People die. People are imprisoned for long times. People go into exile and never return, and families are torn apart, and so on and so forth. A revolution is a nasty business. But if the revolutionaries are not prepared to do what they must do after a revolution, after they have won a revolution, then they should not even start the business of the revolution. They must stay at home with their wives and husbands and children, because the revolution is a nasty business. If you want a revolution but you're not prepared to defend it, you're better off just staying at home. Don't go into a revolution if you're not prepared to defend it. And so our historical duty as the generation of today, the youth of today, is to defend the gains of the revolution. Ubuntu Party is about defending the gains of the revolution and refocusing the government into a developmental state that puts the developmental needs of the population above everything else. Thank you.
Maybe before we allow corporate Molefe, there's Facebook check up are there any comments or questions? We can only take 3 hands. Possible 4 minutes. Okay, in that sequence, yourself, Lanita, and yourself, okay, 2.
Thank you very much, Comrade Chair. Molefe, to you to come and grace our region. Just to give us a brief political insight in terms of our state entities, our state-owned entities. And in the background that you have shared with us has provided a lot of insight in the city, but however, there's a need, there's a push that we need to drive as an MK party since now we are in government. How are we going to influence our government in order to reshape the current status quo in those state-owned entities? Because it is pivotal that these state-owned entities, they must be able to drive our economy. They must be able to deliver for the masses. And they must be able to create jobs for the poor of the poorest in order to remove our people from the scourges of poverty. I'll beg you, Chair, just to give me maybe 2 minutes of your time, because there are certain issues that I want to make a submission of the city. So that when we Commander Molefe leaves, then we have a task when it goes to the national leadership to share with them. That we have a crisis of youth unemployment, we have a crisis of unemployment in general in South Africa, especially in the case of KZN. Now we're in government, we are simply saying that to use the budget that is allocated for national parliamentary seats as well as the provincial legislatures, please design programs that will be able to absorb our people, especially our ground forces, because we are aware that there's a certain percentage that has been allocated to Mkoto's party since now we're in government. We have ground forces that are selfless are driving the programs of Mkoto's party without anything to feed themselves and go to bed with. So we don't want to find ourselves in a situation, Commander, that our people lose hope. We don't want to Mkoto season to be labeled as a stepping ladder of other certain individuals to aspire to the position of authority. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Tamalan. Great from I also have them to be original we MK. One of the comrades input systems work comrades to and also extend the criticisms so that we see ground forces of MK task. Comrades, the all the leadership was delayed at the arrival. But several inputs completely by Molefe work on planning and Tika, or we are partially agree with it, or we disagree. The current generation of ours must defend the base of our revolution. The question is first will be, what is the revolution? According to my understanding of the revolution, revolution is a total transfer of power from one class to another. And that process cannot be smooth. So the state-owned enterprises that we're talking about currently are not transferable, are not in favor of the working class. So companies, and if you are a revolutionary, you must be prepared by all means to suffer. That was the history of the company. You need your own now. When I start with the security, none of you will. So the company, let the light of your head down. What do you not do? And now the company is not that. They will say, I will not have a man and 12. Now we're going to smash. Yes, we're going to have a nice figure of the always comes. And if you talk about one of the human shape, you have to know what's and then
The first question was about how do we influence government to change government policies in terms of, in respect of state-owned entities. Well, if we had not done anything, if President Zuma had not done anything between last year and now, we would still be where we were last year. But now, a space has been opened. A space has been opened. Mkondo has won seats in parliament. We are able to stand up in parliament and express our views and say what it is that we think is needed to change the state-owned entities and to turn South Africa into a developmental state. It's a contested terrain. It is a site of struggle. And our sides of struggles are numerous. Parliament is one, local government is one, the NGO sector is one, the MK party, building of the party and making sure that we win elections is one, all with the purpose of making sure that in the end we'll be able to change government policy in respect of SOEs and to refocus government's energies on development second question was about designing programs to create jobs. As Umkhonto is a party, the monies of people going to parliament and so on and so on. Umkhonto is a party itself should not be a place of employment. DCT, Durban Container Terminal, ESCO, the different mines, the different entities of the state should become where people get employed. So we as MKP can only play in parliament and elsewhere a facilitative role to ensure that Durban Container Terminal, the Port of Moha, Port of Cape Town, the railways and so on employ people maximally to ensure that the local government has got programs to create jobs and create them where people can have meaningful jobs. We only facilitate that process, and we should never view the political party itself as the creator of jobs. And I agree with the comrade that says that the revolutionary must be prepared to suffer. A revolutionary must also be disciplined, and I agree with those sentiments on expressed about a revolution. What happened in 1994 is not really a revolution, perhaps a step in the right direction, but not quite a revolution itself. The original colonial institutions were not removed in 1994. The apartheid institutions were not removed in 1994. The structure of society was not changed in 1994. People still stay in Soweto and in Edenvale, and white people still stay in town, Pietermaritzburg. So the apartheid structure of society still exists. We have not totally, through a revolution, removed all of those things. I want to agree with that comrade in that respect. However, we have created a space for us to fight in a bigger battlefield. If you like, in the military, they call it opening up a front, opening up a hole, a front in the enemy lines to enable us to fight further, to push back the enemy further. We are certainly in a much better position to push back the enemy than we were in 1985, than we were in 1975, than we were in 1965. So the conditions have changed, and it is the conditions that have changed that must dictate our strategies. Logic and being realistic must dictate how we engage in these battles. Thank you.
How are you? Thank you very much, comrades. I think we are going to allow Comrade Brian Utashie Batsiakubela the program. The program continues. In actual fact, only the sun already, but we want to thank Comrade Brian Eskatsake and the my insights assessment was basically very specific. I couldn't make a program where we SOPs we state. Ungakuthi makuthiwa kulethethwe unbundling noma ukudayiswa kwama-state owned enterprises kutholakala abasha bejabula bengazi ukuthi what does that mean in the context of the class struggle. So siyabonga kakhulu Brian Molefe. Comrades, we proceed with our program. Siyazi sithe masifika straight to speaker. Will allow our convener, Comrade Lundu, to greet us and then introduce Ubolo Kuala Republic. Comrade Lundu.
Manja, wetu, Manja, wetu, viva Msholozi, viva, viva Msholozi, viva, Chikijela, Mkondwe Sizwe, Chikijela.
Chikijela mkondo wesizwe chikijela. FIFA MK Youth Team FIFA